And welcome back to Film Foundations, the collaborative show between Weirding Way Media and someone's favorite productions. I am your co-host, Chris Dashew from Weirding Way Media and the Culture Cast.
And I am Ryan Verrill from Someone's Favorite Productions and the Disc Connected.
On this show, we ask and answer 4 questions about a given topic that is either an actor, director, microgenre, or in this episode's case, a franchise. Our job is to entice you to broaden your horizons on film, to encourage you to travel down film tangents and side roads that you may never have traveled down. And today on this episode, we will be your guides, sort of. We'll be following along with our guest today. Our guest all the way from, you've heard him on our Barney Miller show a couple times. He's been on the Projection Booth. He's been on the Culture Cast and Bollywood Cinema Club. But on this episode, our dear friend, Mr. Otto Bruno, author, historian, and all-around good guy, is joining us today.
There you go. How you doing, guys?
Good, Otto. So before we get into what we're talking about on this episode, the Thin Man series, tell us if someone was out on the internet looking for things you've done, what might they be finding? What do you spend your time doing, Otto?
That's quite a
professionally. That is professionally. How's that? Better question.
Well, before we officially, got on the air here, I was just saying how I try to do as little as possible and try to leave my house as seldom as possible. And I might be on the internet even less. I can be found at jazz90.1.org, which is a radio station here in Rochester where I have been hosting a radio show I'm in my 25th year doing that. I play a lot of classic jazz and old standards, Sinatra and Ella Fitzgerald and people like that. As you have already alluded to, my first book came out a couple of years ago on Barney Miller, the TV show, the classic TV show from the 70s and early 80s. And I'm just finishing up my second manuscript, which is a baseball book that'll be published sometime next year by McFarlane. It's all on Italian-American baseball players. And then I spend my other time teaching about classic film and classic television, basically.
So speaking of classic film, obviously if you clicked on this episode, you know that we're talking about the Thin Man series. But I have to ask you, Otto, why, if given the broad spectrum of anything and everything you could talk about, why the Thin Man series? What motivated you to be like, the Thin Man is what I want to be talking about in this episode of Film Foundation?
Well, one of the questions you threw out to us was film series. I gave you a few choices of things that I have a passion for and am interested in. And as far as film series go, I love the Thin Man movies. Mike White, your friend Mike White, always asks on the Projection Booth, when did you first see such and such a picture? I don't even know when the first time was I saw the Thin Man. I think it was either during college or after college. And the first thing that kind of intrigued me back then was on the credits, it was based on a Dashiell Hammett novel. And I knew who Hammett was by that time because I definitely had seen The Maltese Falcon. I saw The Maltese Falcon for the first time when I was maybe 10, 11, 12, something like that. Still one of my all-time favorite films. And so that kind of intrigued me. And, of course, very different movie. The Thin Man movies are very different from Maltese Falcon. But I was taken by probably the same thing that most people are taken by when they see it the first time. The repartee between Powell and Loy, which is what you got out of the very best screwball comedies or romantic comedies of that time. But this added the murder mystery aspect to it, which I love. I love murder mysteries. So that was kind of neat. And, of course, the other thing that everyone notices, which, of course, has become less funny in the last 20 or 30 years, is the amount of alcohol that they imbibe during this, particularly the first one. I mean, quite literally, the first scene we see with Myrna Loy is she's being dragged into a bar by her dog, Asta, and she falls on the floor with all these Christmas packages, and she's meeting up with her husband, Nick, played by William Powell, and she says to him, "How many have you had so far?" And he says, "This is my sixth," meaning sixth martini. So when the waiter comes over to her, he says, "What can I get you, madame?" She says, "Line 6 up right here. I want them lined up right here." That's pretty, that's an interesting way to be introduced to the female character in this film in 1934. That's another important date because this film is essentially comes out at it was like one of the last pictures, I believe, to squeak through before they started really enforcing the production code. So, there was a lot of loose morals that were portrayed. A guy has a mistress and another woman is living with a guy who we think is her husband, but then we find out isn't her husband. And so there's a lot of things that within a few months or a year would not have been allowed to be shown in that film. So pretty interesting. And again, the whole magic of this series is the chemistry between William Powell and Myrna Loy. And as many authors and historians and such have noted over the years, film fans have noted over the years, is that the really unusual thing was that you had a man and wife, husband and wife, who not only loved each other, but genuinely seemed to like one another and enjoy spending time with one another. That was not only unusual before The Thin Man, but it was pretty unusual even after The Thin Man for the most part. That's not how marriages were depicted on the screen often. When I was preparing for this podcast, I went on and said other films with husband and wife, characters, and you get things like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and that was like one of the top 10 things I thought. The great one with the one with Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner.
Oh, Romancing the Stone?
It's not Romancing the Stone. It's when they're getting divorced, the couple that's getting divorced. Oh, God. It is a dark comedy that was directed by Danny DeVito. I think it's the name of the couple, whatever their name is. But
The War of the Roses?
The War of the Roses, thank you. That comes up, and that obviously you two have apparently never seen that movie.
No.
That is the definition of a dark comedy about these two people who were married and in love, and at the beginning of the picture, but not by the end of the picture.
Right.
So yeah, it's just that was that I still think, because like I say, that the alcohol alone is something that I think would turn off younger people today, or or more woke audiences, or however you want to put it, because it is crazy the amount of alcohol he drinks, and he quite, there's no hiding the fact that he loves it.
Right.
It's like treated in a very humorous and enjoyable way. Like there's no guilt whatsoever. There's no self-recrimination whatsoever. You never hear him say, "Oh, I should really stop" or whatever. Certainly in the first one, which is the best one, of course. So the best Thin Man film is the first. There were ultimately 6 of them, but the best one, without any doubt, is the first one. And the other humorous part about it is, as I said, it's kind of a combination of a romantic comedy and a screwball comedy, but it has that murder mystery element added in. But the funny thing is that, again, particularly in the first one, the murder mystery is really not that important as their relationship is.
Right.
In my opinion.
Well, I think you've kind of already broached the issue, so let's just, kind of jump into it. So is there any history that you think is needed to further inform anyone about the Thin Man series before we get into the questions? Is there anything else that anyone needs to know? Because you've done a pretty good job covering it so far, but... Well,
in terms of background history, let's start with the fact that both William Powell and Myrna Loy were just on the cusp at this point of becoming major movie stars. And I think this movie is what really catapulted them to real movie stardom. Powell had started in silent films as a villain. He usually played the villain in silent movies. And then when they moved to sound, he was in another detective franchise before this, right before this, in fact. He was Philo Vance on film. Philo Vance was another famous detective from literature. I'm trying to remember who the guy was who wrote...
S.S. Van Dyne?
Van Dyne, yes, thank you, Van Dyne. So I think he did 1 or 2 Philo Vance movies. Then they did another one with Basil Rathbone. And then he came back and did one final Philo Vance movie called The Kennel Murder Case, which I believe came out either the year before or the same year as The Thin Man. So he had that kind of... he had already become somewhat known to movie audiences as a film detective. Although, for me, I think Nick Charles is far more enjoyable than Philo Vance, just because Philo Vance, like Charles, also had a lot of money, but Philo Vance was more like from money. I mean, that's another fun thing about the Thin Man series, of course, is technically the class differences between Nick Charles and Nora Charles, because you learn in the first movie and throughout the series that they're living on Myrna Loy's inheritance. Her family was very wealthy. And in fact, in the first movie, Nick basically says that he quit detecting, he quit being a detective because now he's just taking care of his wife's money. And he says it kind of tongue-in-cheek, but that's supposed to be the whole thing, is that she came from money. And a running gag that goes throughout the whole series is that they're always running into people that Nick usually has put away, has sent to prison. None of them are ever, for the most part, can't really think of anyone that he put away that, comes up to him afterwards and says hello, who's angry at him for doing it. They're usually proud of the fact that he was the only person who could have put them into jail. And they have great names like Spider Web and Creeps and, all these things like that. And she, of course, I think it's in After the Thin Man, 1936, where they're coming from the train station. She's just had her wallet, her bag stolen from her by one of Nick's old pals, and Nick gets it back from this guy who lifts it off of her. And now they're in the car and they're driving down the street, and it's supposed to be in San Francisco, and all these, great street characters, like a Damon Runyon story type characters, are saying hello to Nick as they're slowly going down the street. And then you see this couple that looks like the guy from the Monopoly game, with the top hat, and this old dowager lady, and they drive by and she says, "Oh, hello, Nora." And Nick turns to Nora and said, "Oh, who's that?" And Nora says, "Oh, you wouldn't know them, dear. They're respectable." So that was a big part of the series, was that he definitely did not come from money. They kind of ruin it with The Thin Man Comes Home, the fifth film, which may be the most problematic of all of the entire series, because in that film, they all of a sudden try to make you believe that he grew up in a small town and his father was the small town doctor, which is really not the way any of us imagined it if you watch the first four films. So
sure.
But they were obviously getting desperate for storylines by that time, and it just did not work. But so for history, he started out as a film detective before Thin Man with Philo Vance. Even before that, he was a film villain in silent pictures. She did some silent pictures. And then in those first few years, she was always played a very exotic foreign character, often a temptress, often a femme fatale. Quite often, again, something that we don't like to think about or would not approve of nowadays, but she played Asian characters on more than one occasion and, things like that. Excuse me. And then they met on film together in a film called Manhattan Melodrama, which came out the same year as this, I believe, but before The Thin Man. And that co-starred Clark Gable. And it was the old story, which was already an old story in 1934, about the two kids who had grown up together. One went and worked for the law. One went and became a gangster, or, that.
Right.
And, but that movie, Manhattan Melodrama, which is a good film, became most famous. Do you guys know why? Have either of you ever seen this film?
Mm-mm.
I think I may have, but I'm probably confusing it with something else.
Well, it became most famous because it was the film that lured John Dillinger out of hiding in Chicago to go see this film, and someone in the theater recognized him, called the police, and he was basically shot down outside of the theater when he was leaving the theater, and it was to see Manhattan Melodrama. So the film became really famous for that reason alone.
That's wild.
Yeah. And so in terms of history, that's all you need to know about the history of those two before this. And then after that, I think they ended up doing a total of 11 or 12 films together.
That's wild.
So 6 were the Thin Man movies, but they did other, they did the Manhattan Melodrama first. They did another one that was kind of a melodrama too, called Evelyn Prentice, which wasn't that great. But then they did more comedies. They did, Love Crazy, I Love You Again. What was the other ones? Ooh, can't think of the other. I know there was at least another one that I... And then it
was 14, by the way.
Oh, 14 times. Okay. Because because they say 14, but I think when they say 14, at least one of those 14 was just a cameo. I think Myrna Loy made a cameo in the Mermaid picture, or was it The Senator Was Indiscreet or something like that? She made a cameo in one of Powell's films near the end of Powell's career, because Powell retired. His last movie was Mr. Roberts, which was 1955. He lived almost another 30 years. So wild. Yeah, he just walked away from the business, and he had kind of a tragic history romantically, because he was married to Carol Lombard, and they divorced but remained friends. And then he was engaged to be married to Jean Harlow when she died. at the age of like 28 or whatever it was she was.
Jeez, right.
And then 26 she might have been. And then he married this young starlet named Diana Lewis, and everyone thought, well, that'll never work. He's just doing it because he was on the rebound and he was depressed and all that. And that marriage lasted for well over 40 years, I believe, until his death. So, but yeah, he retired in 55. So what was he? 63, I guess, when he retired. So he did not go on. But of course, in those days, leading men, he was a leading man. But by 55, and Mr. Roberts, obviously, he's doing a character part as the doctor. But still, the stars didn't think about acting and weren't really given lead roles into their 80s like they might be today.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Well, especially female actors. Definitely, male actors is one thing, but female actors don't even try. Right?
Female actors, if you had the audacity to turn 40, forget about it. You were done.
Right.
There were very few who sustained, real. Betty Davis and Barbara Stanwyck, I think, were probably the two most successful that I can think of that era of female stars, people who were real stars.
So, with a little bit of the history out of the way, let's jump into that first question that we've kind of already talked about. The first question, as always, is what, Otto, do you consider to be a foundational title for the Thin Man series?
Well, I gave it away. It's got to be the first. It's got to be the first film. It's our introduction to Nick and Nora. And by the way, the first 3 films, I think, were all. Let's see. The first 3 were written by Albert Hackett and Francis Goodrich, who were a husband and wife screenwriting team. And the first 4 movies were all directed by W.S. Van Dyke, known to his friends as Woody Van Dyke. And obviously, maybe not surprisingly, those are the best of the series. Even the 4th one, which I believe is The Shadow of the Thin Man, is enjoyable, and that's the last one directed by Van Dyke. The Thin Man Goes Home is funny. I was able to see 4 out of the 6 within the last week or two, and I'll get to that in a minute. But the original Thin Man is definitely the best. Goodrich and Hackett were, obviously their dialogue in the film, particularly in the first one, is just, I hate to use this overused word, but it sparkles. It's just incredible. So many, and the character actors, which Chris knows, I love the old character actors, and the people in this original one. There's what's his name? Nat Pendleton is the kind of the dopey detective in this, and a young Cesar Romero is in this.
Nice.
For you youngsters, the Joker from Batman's 1966. Who else? It's just, I can't think of the guy.
I think they would probably know him as the Joker with the mustache.
There you go, the Joker with the mustache. Yeah, exactly.
Joker with the painted mustache.
The painted mustache, right. The Joker with the pancake makeup on his mustache.
On his mustache, right, exactly. Boy, that used to bother me when I was a kid. But anyway.
I don't think it doesn't. I think it bothers everybody, myself included. Which I'm assuming it had to be because he didn't want to shave his mustache off, right?
That's absolutely why it was. Yeah.
Cesar Romero, everybody.
It has Maureen O'Sullivan in it, and Maureen O'Sullivan, of course, is or was Mia Farrow's mother, and she was also Jane in the Tarzan movies of that time. Who else is in it? One of my favorite character actors usually always played like a gangster type. Another guy who was right off the Damon Runyon assembly line. That was a guy named Edward Brophy. And what's funny is he plays in this particular film a character named Joe Morelli. And Joe Morelli is a lifelong friend of mine and is our United States congressman from here in New York State where I live. His name is Joe Morelli. Oh, Porter Hall is in it. Porter Hall was a very famous character actor. Again, if people are fans of Preston Sturges, a great comedy director, Porter Hall was in a lot of those. And the other interesting thing about this first film, which we will see throughout the series, the biggest co-star in the film, the most important co-star in the film with Myrna Loy and William Powell is not a human being. It's a dog, Asta. And this dog became quite famous. And I'm trying to think, there were another movie he was in that was a popular movie, and I'm blanking on it now. But that was kind of a neat thing. I don't think Asta is in the original Hammett story. I don't believe. Now, I've only read the original Thin Man one time, but I don't remember him being in it. And by the way, and I'll really piss off some people now, but this is one of those rare instances where I do think the movie was better than the story. I've read the story within the last year or two, and it's good, but it's, believe it or not, it might even be more confusing than the movie. Or maybe it's just not as enjoyable because you don't have the Powell Loy chemistry right in front of you as you do in the film. The other foundational little bit of trivia is, and for those, I guess I always need to remember I should think of myself as talking to people who have never seen this movie before. But Thin Man fans know very well that even though the Thin Man title stayed with the series throughout, the reality is William Powell is not the Thin Man. The Thin Man in the first film is actually the first murder victim. But because, it did so well and it was, Nick and Nora Charles in The Thin Man, the Thin Man right. Stayed with, that title stayed with the series. But it was always kind of funny because the first time I ever saw it, I'm like, well, wait a minute, that guy's the Thin Man. So why are, So that's another little bit of foundational trivia, if you will.
Well, an interesting trail to go down with that is for this time period when they had a success, a lot of those got mined a lot, and it got mined quickly instead of getting dragged out and waiting. This whole franchise is over 14 years, which nowadays that's like nothing, but for back then that feels like a very long time. Do you think they might have had a little higher quality if they churned these out a little quicker back then?
That's a good point in terms of quality being better, because, of course, Woody Van Dyke died, I think, in 45 or 40. So I think he died before at least the last one, maybe the last two. Right. So maybe that's why he didn't direct either of the last two. But, yeah, that's a good point, and I know that Goodrich and Hackett just didn't feel like they had anything left to give for it. So, but of course, as we all know, if you've got a successful franchise, the studio is not going to close a shot on it. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know. I personally, as a fan, and I can watch all of them. I mean, I'll find something to enjoy about every single one of them. But I think overall, the first four, if you had stopped after four, that would have been okay. I don't think you would have really missed anything. Like I say, the fifth one, which was The Thin Man Goes Home, kind of exploded some of the continuity of the storyline for us. And the sixth one, Song of the Thin Man, they were just kind of, I think they were both kind of tired of it at that point, both Myrna Loy and William Powell. I mean, my other problem, and I don't think this was Powell's issue. I have a feeling this was the studio's issue. But one of my problems with the later Thin Man films is Powell's dyed hair. He's obviously getting longer in the tooth, and the hair is Ronald Reagan black. And if you know how I feel about Ronald Reagan, you know that's not a compliment. So you'll see other films shortly after the Thin Man films where Powell is letting his hair go white, letting it go gray, and so for that reason alone, I have a feeling that he wasn't the one who was demanding that he get his hair colored. I think it was probably the studio, and that always bothers me when I see that in the later films too. But I always remember watching the very first time I watched The Thin Man Goes Home, which is number 5. Edward Brophy, the guy who's also in the first one, who played Joe Morelli in the first one, he's a totally different character in the fifth movie. And you're told early on in the film that because Nick is going home and his father doesn't approve of his drinking, that he's going on the wagon for the trip. And he's got a flask, one of the old type flasks that you wear in your, have in your pocket, and he's only drinking cider. And then they run into Brophy's character on the train, and he's posing as a greeting card salesman, and he says, "How am I doing, Nick? All right?" He goes, "Yeah, good." He says, "But learn some of the phrases, that are in the cards." So you think, well, is he having him come along on this trip? Because his wife knows nothing about this guy. She thinks it's just an old friend of his that they run into on the train. Clearly, from their exchange, he's there because Powell wants him there. And the only reason that makes sense is Powell would have him there was maybe to get him alcohol whenever he would want it.
Right.
But that never happens. And even when he gets into his hometown, they're trying to draw him into the murder that takes place, and he wants nothing to do with it for the first 30 minutes or more. So why is this guy there? It's never explained. It makes no sense whatsoever. So there are little things like that that happen more later on. But in this first script, it's just, like I say, that the plot, I guess, I've read that people find the plot confusing, but again, it never bothered me because I don't think in the first movie that the plot is that important. I think what's important is that you're being introduced to this couple that are, it's almost like it's 1934, but they're almost living like it's still the Roaring '20s. I mean, their life is a party, basically, and they're having a damn good time. They're not in any way apologetic about their wealth, but at the same time, they're not haughty about their wealth either. And she, by the way, another difference in a husband-wife relationship in a movie, she's encouraging him to go and investigate this murder. Instead of saying, "Oh no, it's too dangerous, dear, don't go out there and do that," she's not only encouraging him to go do it, she wants to go with him and investigate it. Yeah, back in those days, that's what we'd call a real broad, man. You know?
All the parting makes it sound like they were part of the nonchalant depression.
Yeah, I mean, there is no hint of the depression in this film. I think it's fairly safe to say. I mean, the people who need money in the film don't need money the way real people needed it. You know,
right.
They were spoiled people like the Thin Man's ex-wife who had thrown away, spent all her money and wanted more out of him. But that's not the same thing as the guy trying to sell apples on the street corner to feed his family. So, very different setup by all means. And then, like I say, we touched on it at the beginning. I think we would, unquestionably recognize Nick Charles today as an alcoholic, albeit a highly functioning one.
Right.
But
clearly.
Yeah. But, I mean, I get a headache sometimes just watching him down those things because I'm thinking, oh my God, I don't know how he could do it. What I like about him though is that he is able in these movies to play tipsy without playing down and out drunk. You know what I mean? So he doesn't pretend like it doesn't affect him at all. But at the same time, he's not playing it for that comic level of out and out falling down the stairs drunk type thing. So
he's not trying to be a lush is what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, he's definitely a lush, but he's trying not to be a silent film comedian who's doing all kinds of slapstick falls and things
Over
like
the top.
that. Yeah.
Drunk pantomiming.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That first movie, you're just celebrating Christmas. Come on.
And exactly, I wrote that in the notes. I'm like, they give them a little reason for it because it's the holidays. So and of course the second film, it's New Year's. So you do have parties atmosphere in both of those first two films. But no such now in the third film you have the excuse of Nora's family, which you also have, by the way, in the second film. So both the second and third film, he has a reason to drink because he's stuck with Nora's, spending time and try to help out Nora's family, who of course all disapprove of him because they are all very haughty and rich. They all feel like she married beneath herself. So you have that excuse, I guess, for his drinking there. And by the fourth film, he is still drinking, but now they have an impressionable little son. And situationally, Nora will make him cut back a little, but she does not put him on the wagon just because the boy's there. In fact, in The Shadow of the Thin Man, which is the fourth film, there's a sequence in it where at the very beginning, he's out in the park across the street. They're in like this penthouse apartment or something. He's out in the park across the street with the boy and Asta. And the Myrna Loy and their maid are like, well, gee, they're past due their time. They should be getting back. So Nora goes over to the liquor tray there and starts mixing a martini and shaking it. And the maid said, and as soon as she starts doing that, Nick says, Nicky, to his son, he says, I think we're needed somewhere else. And they get up from the bench and he starts going back home. And the maid sees this and she turns to Myrna Loy and she says, does he hear that?
Does he know? It's like the bat signal.
Right. And Myrna Loy says, that's Mr. Charles, and this is a martini. They'll get together. And that, so that's as far as the fourth. And then by the fifth one is where he goes home and he's supposedly on the wagon throughout. And then the sixth one, he's not on the wagon anymore, but it's not as important to him at all as it was. But as Ryan said, those last two, you're talking late 40s now for those last two films, as opposed to 1934. So very different. Also remember, historically speaking, the first one, 1934, means what? It means that Prohibition had just ended. It had only ended about a year before that. And for the previous 14 years before that, it was illegal. So,
yeah.
So they're kind of like a sign of the times, the sign of the changing times a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's safe to say.
And what's interesting is, I was sitting here thinking to myself, like, okay, when we talk about detectives or pairs of detectives, in terms of the kinds of things that they imbibe, it's always, for the most part, alcohol. I mean, the new Sherlock Holmes, and I mean, some of the Sherlock Holmes kind of hints that he was maybe on opium or something like that, but you don't really see someone like, oh, he's like a pothead detective. That's not a thing. Like, that's not a thing the way that this is. Like you said, I mean, even if you just go and do a cursory search on Wikipedia, in the description of this movie, it goes, they drink copious amounts of alcohol. Like, that's, like you said, it's part and parcel. And what's interesting is alcohol tends to be the vice of choice for the hard-boiled detectives, as it were. Right. They're not, lighting up a joint and hanging out and, smoking a doob and thinking about it. They're drunk, or they're drinking a lot of alcohol. And it's very interesting because, to your point, Otto, functioning alcoholic, like, that's like those two things together. Like, that's what we're getting at here. And like, it's interesting because it's a harder hill to climb up of than a functioning weed head. Let's just put it that way. Like,
me, of course, being as pure as I am, I wouldn't know that, Chris.
All around good guy, Otto Bruno.
All around good guy.
But you see what I mean? It's just kind of weird, right? Like, it is strange.
I mean, in terms of pot in general, I mean, in the 30s and 40s, it was definitely being used, but it was thought of as a musician's, jazz musicians thing,
right? Oh, yeah.
It was not as for, I know this isn't probably the right term, but it was not as quote unquote domesticated as it became in the 60s and 70s. So,
right. I'm talking even now, that's not a thing. Like, then it wasn't a thing. Still, that's not really a thing. Like, at least not in an adaptation on film forms.
Not on detectives. Yeah, you're right.
Which is weird.
I feel like, but I haven't seen it in a while, so I can't say this for sure. But I feel like Elliot Gould's take on Philip Marlowe in The Long Goodbye, I feel like he might have smoked a joint or two in that. But I can't really remember. But you make a great point. I mean, you're right. It's always the alcohol. And, of course, what's interesting, too, is, like, William Powell doesn't smoke nearly as much as, like, Bogart does in his films. And when he's playing a detective, of course, when Bogart's playing anything, he's constantly smoking. And thus he died at 56 or 57 of lung cancer. And Powell, unusual for his time, for a man born in 1892, lived to be 92. So that wasn't all that common back then.
Right.
So he must have taken pretty good care of himself. So
I guess alcohol goes with the hard-boiled. I don't know. Just something about hard-boiled and alcohol, right? Like, part and kind of parcel, really.
Right. Well, the same in Westerns, right? I mean, you're always seeing the gunslinger, and they're all belly up to the bar, and it's got to be rot gut,
Right. Whiskey from a jug that has 3 X's on it.
Yeah. There's the famous, I think it's in Road to Utopia, where Crosby and Hope belly up to the bar in this rough mining town, where these guys are mining for gold. It's supposed to be the gold rush time. And Hope says, "Give me a sarsaparilla." And the bartender gives him a dirty look, and all of a sudden he's realized what he said, and he panics for a second, then he says, "In a dirty glass."
Don't clean it, spit in it first.
Right, exactly. Which they used to do
Right.
in those films as well. I think they do. Don't they do that in Blazing Saddles?
Oh yeah.
With the whole point where the guy spits in the glass. So, all right. What else, Chris? What's next?
Yeah. So moving on from the first question, question number 2: could you recommend a title in the Thin Man series that, like you've already alluded to, obviously, I think to your point, first one is the right starting place. Beyond that, it seems to be rather nebulous. So, Otto, if someone was looking for something else to watch in the Thin Man series, what would be another deeper cut, but still I think is interesting a choice as the original?
Well, everybody always seems to like After the Thin Man, which was the next one in 1936, the best. And it has some great people in it because it had Jessie Ralph. Oh, my God. She was a great old character actress, played old dowagers and stuff. And she is very funny in the second one. Again, she doesn't like Nick Charles, but she needs him, so she'll use him. But to show her disregard for him, she'll call him Nicolas. And she'll make a point of saying Nicolas. No matter how many times Nora says Nick to him, she'll always say Nicolas. And it's got George Zucco, who became kind of well known to monster movie fans because he was always in some of the worst monster movies and always played this creepy kind of character. Joseph Kalea was a great character actor. And Penny Singleton is in this one. Penny Singleton became most famous for being Blondie in the Blondie and Dagwood film series. There was a series of films, Blondie and Dagwood films as well. A lot of them, actually. So she's in this. And of course, most famous person who co-starred in After the Thin Man, which was the second film, is a young James Stewart before he was really Jimmy Stewart, before he was a star at this point. And a lot of people enjoy seeing Stewart in this. My problem with After the Thin Man, it is a great film. So it's not. But there's a woman who plays Nora's cousin, Selma. Her name is Elisa Landy. And you feel bad for her. And the aunt, Jessie Ralph, who I guess plays her aunt or her mother, I can never quite figure that out, is terrible to her. But ultimately, you want to slap Selma because she's so over the top with her histrionics. You want to just slap her and say, suck it up, man. Get some backbone. Be more like your cousin Nora. But this woman is she's kind of too weak for me. The one I would suggest to people, because it's still Goodrich and Hackett. It's still Van Dyke. And that might be the third one, which is Another Thin Man. And that is a favorite of mine because of two other character actors that are in it. One is, really three. One is Sheldon Leonard, who, of course, became huge as a Hollywood television producer. I mean, Sheldon Leonard's most famous to film fans as Nick the bartender in It's a Wonderful Life. But he also became very famous as the producer and sometimes director of shows like The Danny Thomas Show, The Dick Van Dyke Show, The Andy Griffith Show, Gomer Pyle, I Spy. So he had an incredible, incredible career. And again, you almost feel when you see him on screen that Damon Runyon created him in a factory somewhere because he's the perfect Runyon-esque character. And then there are two other guys in Another Thin Man. One is called Abner Biberman. And Abner Biberman plays Sheldon Leonard's hatchet man in this. He's like his right-hand man in this movie. Biberman went on to become a very busy television director in the 50s, 60s, and 70s as well. And he's great. He's about, 4'10" or something, very short little guy. And then the final guy who I love, and he's the guy in this particular one in After the Thin Man who plays the character Creeps, who I mentioned earlier. That was a guy named, oh shoot, what's his name now? Harry Belliver. Harry Belliver. And the sequences, there's a couple of very funny sequences with Harry Belliver in this. He plays a bellhop, again, who's going to rob the Charles hotel suite until he realizes that it's Nick. And of course, Nick had put him in jail at one time or another, but he holds no resentment towards him. And when he finds out that Nick's son is about to turn 1 year old the next day or the next week, he wants to throw a party for the kid, the little baby. And that's a whole scene in and of itself, which is very funny. So I think, you know, if you're a big Jimmy Stewart fan, then sure, watch After the Thin Man. But if you're a Sheldon Leonard or, you know, a fan of Sheldon Leonard, and I think maybe there's a little more comedy in the Another Thin Man, 1939. But quite honestly, you can't go wrong with After the Thin Man or Another Thin Man, which are the second and third ones in them. I think those first three are really strong, and even if they're really strong in descending order, they're still better than most of the things that came after them.
I know this is a bit of a tangent. You mentioned Penny Singleton doing the Blondie series. I went and looked for you a second. I didn't realize there are 28 of those movies.
A lot, yeah.
28.
Arthur Lake was the guy who played Dagwood, and Penny Singleton played Blondie. I knew that it was. I thought it might be about 20. Even I didn't realize it was 28, but I knew there were a lot of them.
Many.
But they were, you know, that was the days of the double features, so they were only about an hour long. All those films, you know, they were B movies to be sure. But believe me, they have their fans out there. That series, yeah, definitely.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
You sound great. I got to admit, I know that I've not seen any of these yet, but one of the things, as I've talked about here before, physical media is my big thing. So I look at the home video releases and stuff like that. And Warner Archive, which is a home video department through Warner Brothers that spends a lot of time doing restorations through 2019 all the way up through 2022. They had put all 6 of the Thin Man movies out, and they've all been on my wish list waiting for a decent sale since then. They're probably gonna have to come off soon. I'm eager to see all of these. Yeah,
I have them all, and yeah, I mean, and now that's one. See, I don't have regular cable TV anymore, so I don't get TCM anymore. I watch Criterion. I do subscribe to Criterion. But I have well over 1,000 DVDs. So I'm sure I don't, you know, even come close to your level of it. But I back in the day, I bought every new DVD release of the classic films when they came out. So I have, you know, tons of all the people who I love, like Tracy and Bogart and Myrna Loy and people like that. So.
Yeah, mostly just wanted a little bit of a shout out of if you're listening to this and you're a fan of the Thin Man or just classic Hollywood. Warner Archive is one of the best for restoring things. I mean, just it might have been earlier in 2024 that they gave us like the first or second Oscar winner. I think now we finally have all Oscar winners on high def Blu-ray finally.
Oh wow!
For Best Picture. So
Wings at Wings.
It was. Maybe I think Wings was already out. It might have been the second one.
Oh, okay.
But it's one of those that's, and honestly, I may be wrong. We may still be waiting on like one more. But they're a company that every single month it seems like they're announcing one from 1928 to 1945, at least one or two, and they have a pretty incredible library. And they put a lot of love into these restorations, so they deserve a little bit of money. And they're pretty cheap. Like when they come out, they're about $18, but a couple months later, you can easily find them for like $13 all the time on Amazon.
Yeah. No, I have some of the Warner Archive ones, so they are good, definitely.
Well, and to your point, Ryan, it's nice that again that these things are still being taken and put into 4K, and that they're spending the time, because we know that there are plenty of movies out there in the world. They're not hard up to find things to put out there, but I'm glad they're putting these things out there still.
that's kind of the biggest thing I'm leaning at is with today's home video market, most people are buying 70s and 80s horror movies, and that's like the bulk of what is selling. And the fact that Warner Archive is willing to put time and energy and resources and money into restoring classics, that's saying a lot. Not a lot of companies are willing to do that.
Wow. Yeah, like I say, I know I have some Warner Archive releases myself, and they do a good job. I remember, I can't remember what the film was, but a few years back, there was one that had never been put out on anything, and I was so excited. Yeah. I can't believe I'm blanking on it now, but I was very happy to see that they put that one out. So yeah, that tells you something to your point, that if this had never been put out on any other media before that, any other home media before that's a big step. So,
well, Otto, let's go to question number 3 then. What is the biggest impact that the Thin Man franchise has had on pop culture? And again, it doesn't have to be like a specific film. Could be something philosophical, like inspiring a genre or future filmmakers or something.
Well, I mean, the most obvious thing that came to my mind was the whole idea of the husband and wife team in a film story. Like I said, Thin Man is celebrated, I think, to this day because of their relationship and how they really liked one another and worked together with one another. And then, I read in one of the articles or something, and it's so true. In the very first Thin Man movie, there's the scene where Nora walks in and Maureen O'Sullivan is like crying on Nick's shoulder because she was upset. And Nora walks in and finds this beautiful young woman crying on his shoulder. Okay, well, every other movie we would have seen before that, and far, far too many we've seen after that, immediately that's a problem with the relationship now. In some movies, that might be the whole thing that initiates the breakup, and we have to wait till the end for them to get back together. In this, Nora just kind of wrinkles up her face and makes a face at him, and is not in the least bit bothered, not in the least bit intimidated or scared that, oh, I'm losing my husband or whatever. So the only thing I can think of, I mean, not the only thing, but the most important thing I can think of is the husband and wife team, because we continue to see things like that today. I mean, I know years back now, but they remade the Hitchcock film, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, with modern actors. The Incredibles is husband and wife team, isn't it? The animated.
It goes even further. It's a family.
Yeah. And of course, in the direct aftermath of the Thin Man, there was a series of 3 films that came out the first one was called Fast Company, 1938. The second one was Fast and Loose, 1939. And the third one was Fast and Furious, also 1939. What's interesting about those 3 films, the characters are, a husband and wife who own like they're like antique book dealers. So like antiquarian book dealers, basically. And they solve murders. But what's interesting in those 3 films, every single film had different actors and actresses playing the couple. So it was the same characters, but different. So in the first one, it's Melvin Douglas and Florence Rice in Fast Company. Then came Robert Montgomery and Rosalind Russell in Fast and Loose. And finally, Francois Tone and Ann Southern in Fast and Furious. So for whatever reason, maybe they just didn't feel the chemistry was right with any of them. But in those 3 movies, it was the same character, same type of thing, husband and wife who loved each other and they solved these murders or whatever, but only 3 films and that was it. For me, a child of the 70s and of television, the 2 direct influences, I think, are McMillan and Wife and Heart to Heart, 2 TV shows with husbands and wives who love each other very much and are solving crimes, almost always murder. And by the way, the most direct ripoff was Heart to Heart because they were wealthy, they traveled around, it was just these like people who were so wealthy they were bored, they didn't know what else to do, so they solved crimes. But that in terms of that and even Woody Allen ends up using the husband-wife formula in the Manhattan murder mystery. So it's a little different because they're not both as excited about doing it, but it's still something that in some way or another does harken back to Nick and Nora. So they may even mention it, actually, I think, in that movie. So you winked at me, Chris. Are you a big Woody Allen fan?
I like Woody Allen. I think it's funny is in a lot of ways we could go even further to say like the idea of like a lot of TV shows that have men and women as like the co-leads. I mean, it kind of comes from this idea. I mean, something I am a huge fan of detective stuff is, supernatural detectives, but the X-Files. I mean, again, or any of the Law and Order TV shows or any of these things, again, like going to the idea of a man and a woman working together. Sometimes they're married, sometimes they're not, sometimes they're friends, sometimes they're not. But it seems like a lot of that kind of starts here in terms of it being taken seriously and not just like you've kind of alluded to, not a gag so much as, but again, like not focusing on the things that make the story important, which is the relationship between the two people and what they're trying to solve.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Not sure if you know about this one. You conjured the Alfred Hitchcock version. They just had a Mr. and Mrs. Smith TV show, and they just ordered for a second season. So must have done pretty well. But just like you brought up, they're changing the leads. It's not going to be the same leads for the second season. So
oh, wow. Okay.
History repeats.
Yeah. Well, there was another movie, believe it or not, and I've never seen this movie. I want to see it, but it had Gracie Allen as a woman, but there was called Mr. and Mrs. North, which was a film, and then that became a detective show in the 50s. And I can see the guy's face. Richard Denning, I believe, played the male lead, and I don't remember who played the female lead in that. But even Powell did this in some other films. Like directly after this, there was one called Star of Midnight with Ginger Rogers, but she was not his wife, she was his fiancée. And then the year after that, he did one called The Ex Mrs. Bradford. And again, they're solving a murder, but it's Jean Arthur as his ex-wife, not his wife. So.
Well, and it's interesting that, again, like this is where this idea comes from, and now it's kind of don't even think anything of it in this day and age, like Moonlighting, X-Files, lots of I would say like movies are one thing, but TV is another. And like you see this a lot in TV shows where it's two leads paired up solving crimes or doing something. And it's kind of where it all starts, clearly.
Definitely.
Or where they draw a lot of inspiration from, at least.
I mean, you can even make a case for Monk, because Monk always had his female, his nurse was always, she was really more or less his partner. So.
Right. That's fair.
Yeah. Yeah, so it held up. It was an idea that held up.
Right.
And is still holding up.
Well, on that note, we just named a bunch of titles, but our question 4 is always, what is a cinematic bridge to the Thin Man series here? So basically, what is something that somebody who's never seen any Thin Man movies, that if they're a fan of insert answer here, they may likely fall in love with the Thin Man franchise?
Yeah, well, like I say, the ones that are most similar are those Fast movies, Fast and Furious, Fast and Loose, Fast Company. And they're all good. I kind of, that's one where I think what someone would like would depend on which actors or actresses they like. I love Melvin Douglas. I didn't know much about Florence Rice in the original one, Fast Company, but that's a very good one. Robert Montgomery I was never crazy about, but I love Rosalind Russell, and they're Fast and Loose. And then the third one is the weakest, Francois Tone and Ann Southern in Fast and Furious, just because I don't think they're the same level of stars as the other people were. But again, Ann Southern fans will be upset with me for saying that. I mean, I like Ann Sothern, but it's just, she's no Rosalind Russell. The other thing, obviously, is because part of what is somewhat foundational for this series, as I said earlier, was romantic comedy or screwball comedies. Any of the best romantic and or screwball comedies of the late 30s, early 40s would be a good bridge as well. I mean, Powell himself in a movie called My Man Godfrey with his ex-wife, Carol Lombard, is a tremendous film. And the one that I really think of, and again, it's different on one hand because they are acting adversarial throughout the movie, but they are obviously in love anyway, and they're two of a kind. And that is His Girl Friday with Cary Grant and Rosalind Russell, because you have these two very strong characters, male and female, and in some ways, the Rosalind Russell character is even stronger than Nora because she's a talent in her field.
Right.
He's, Grant says she's the best reporter he's ever had. So that was a big deal in 1940 when that movie came out. So that would be a great one if you like something like The Thin Man. I think His Girl Friday would probably be the best in terms of a connected film that's not a murder mystery. You know what I mean? Although there is a serious aspect to it, which there's a guy on death row that they're trying to save, but there's no question who committed the murder.
Right.
In this particular film. But I think for the chemistry between the two leads is also fabulous in His Girl Friday. So that kind of that was the first thing I kind of thought of when I was looking over the question, is to come up with something that people might be interested if they like this. That wasn't a murder mystery.
This may be a difficult question, but a lot of the reason people have not watched any of this is because they're steeped in modern cinema. So do you think there's anything from the last 25 years that is probably not a one-to-one comparison, but might be an indication that this is the type of franchise you would like?
Well, I'm probably the type of person who would annoy those people as much as they annoy me, because I am steeped in classic cinema and have not watched as many as Chris knows. He's sort of shaking his head there already.
As I can attest to, Otto has not a new movie watcher by my approximation.
No.
That's why I said 25 years instead of 10 years.
I think I stopped watching movies actively. I certainly stopped going to movies actively, because I used to go to movies a lot, as a young man. By the end of the 80s, I was done. So
wow.
Now I still watch. My daughter always gives me props when she's like, "Oh my God, you watched a movie from 2006? I can't believe it." So I have watched and will watch movies from the last 30 years, but I'm very, very picky, and I'm certainly not as well versed in that to really even feel like I can't even think of what I would. Oh, geez.
I mean, you already said The Incredibles. That's an okay answer.
Yeah, there you go. The Incredibles. That I saw because I had kids. I don't know. I don't know what. Chris's that was a good connection too. The one with Duchovny and
X-Files, yeah.
X-Files, that's a good one too to compare.
The pairing of men and women together is just it's like a thing you don't even think of now. It's so. Right. I mean, especially on television. Movies are one thing, but television seems to be a very obvious and easy place to mine those relationships, and also drag it out as long as you want, because sometimes they're not together either.
Right. Well, of course, back in the 30s and 40s and those times, you had male buddy films but you didn't really have too many female buddy films. Certainly not features. You had like shorts. There was a whole series of shorts. I think it was with Thelma Todd and oh God, I can see the woman's face. She was a great comedian, and I can't think of her name now. I feel terrible, but now you see a lot of female buddy films, which I think is great because there were for 4 or 5 decades, you saw a lot of male buddies. I mean, really, what were Westerns for the most part other than male buddy films?
Right.
And I say that as a lover of Westerns. I love Westerns, but I think it's kind of nice now to see some more, more female buddy films now than you ever used to. I mean, I personally, now here's a modern duo that I love, but they're 2 women, and that is Tina Fey and Amy Poehler. I love them. No, Chris, you don't buy
That was a long story. I'll tell you after we're done recording.
Don't ruin them for me.
I didn't say anything.
Oh, I love them both. So I don't. No, I don't feel right about trying to even come up with one from the last 30 years because I'm not well enough acquainted with movies from the last.
It makes perfect sense.
The last 30 years. The 30s, 40s are my really like the middle of the plate for me. 50s, 60s, 70s, absolutely. I can still hit something in the 80s, but not after the 80s. I'm no good to you.
Otto. I guess we're glad that you write about Barney Miller then and not something else.
There you go. Well, now television is a little different because I've watched television all along. So
that's fair.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting, though, like we don't have right now like a big male-female duo that is known for being in things together. We don't have that. I mean, even just to take a step back from, romantic slapstick comedies, but also have like a mystery in them, we don't really have like, I can't point to an actor and actress duo right now that are in things all the time together. That's not a thing in and of itself.
Yeah, that's true.
Think about directors working with people like Scorsese works with De Niro and Leonardo DiCaprio a lot. There are plenty of directors that work with specific actors, but we don't see like a pairing that everybody can point to and be like, that's the one.
Right.
14 films is a lot. Like, that's a lot.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Because, I mean, even back in the day, and I think they only did 3 films, maybe 4 together, like Rock Hudson and Doris Day or people like that. But you're right. I can't think of any.
There's no iconic male-female duo in Hollywood anymore.
No.
Last probably would have been Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan. What is that, 3 movies, 4 movies?
Yeah, there you go. Same thing. Right. Yeah, it just doesn't. Well, the other thing, too, that's different. I mean, it was possible in those old studio days if they were both working for the same studio, so they'd put the stars together.
They're trapped, as it were.
Yeah. And then even some of the early people who were more or less independent, like a Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn, if they liked working with each other, they would say, well, let's try to do something together. And they had the strength to make it happen. But now, probably the problem is that every successful actor or actress has their own production company now. I mean, when I do watch a new movie, one of the things that drives me crazy, and I get it, and I don't begrudge anybody this, but I certainly can't be the only one who notices at the beginning of a film, the credits, there's like 7 or 8 different production companies that are, working together, so you see this one's logo, then the next one with this one, with them.
Yeah.
Because everybody has their own production company, which is great. But I think that's probably one of the other reasons why, too, you don't see everybody. It's harder to get something together like that nowadays.
I guess one of the ones that was recent was like Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock. They were in, 2 movies together? I mean, it's not much. Like, in this day and age, like you said, Ryan, like, Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, that's literally 3. Like, you know,
I'm sure we're probably
not very much.
People out there are probably screaming at us right now because we're forgetting something. But
Right.
But I mean, that's the thing. Like, there really isn't.
But the fact that we're not immediately springing to mind shows you they're not iconic.
Right. Well, yeah, they have to be like Bruce Willis and Sybil Shepherd were iconic for the 80s. Like that, you know, David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson, iconic for the 90s. Like 2000s, maybe there is something, like we said, maybe there is something in people who are like, you fucking idiots.
Yeah.
But I mean, look, I mentioned Law and Order. Like, I guess Chris Maloney and Mariska Hargitay probably been doing that for however the fuck long, it's 15 years or whatever the fuck it is at this point.
Right, but but the other thing too is that that's a single project. It's not multiple projects together.
Right.
So
that's the thing. In Indian cinema, SRK and Kajol worked on like 8 or 9 movies together. And like, so what's interesting is that's still kind of a thing elsewhere, not so much here.
Yeah.
I guess. Even within something like the MCU, we have people being recast opposite one another, and those are supposed to be like the impressive duos of people, and even then it's like, nah, who cares? We're not going to bring them back for the next movie. It's like, times have changed. That's not, you know, sometimes those relationships are not ones that anybody really cares about. And in a lot of ways, I mean, the will they, won't they of it all is not necessarily anything I think anyone should really care about, but I like the idea of they're already married. They're doing the thing together. Their marriage isn't they're not boring because they're married is really what this all boils down to. And that's kind of the thing, right? Like when you get married, it's supposed to be boring. Like you're supposed to settle down and have kids. And it's like Nick and Nora not doing that.
Well, the only thing I love and spend more time with than film is television. And if there's anything I hate, it's the will they, won't they thing, which since Moonlighting has gotten so out of control throughout all of television. I mean, they're still doing it to this day on certain one of the very few new shows I watch now is this Abbott Elementary, Quinta Brunson, which I like, and I like the people in it. But you know, they're doing that now with her character and Tyler. I can't think of his last name. The other actor, Tyler Williams, maybe.
Is that the kid from Everybody Hates Chris?
Yes, exactly. So they're doing that with and I hate that. And that is one of the great things about Nick and Nora is you don't have to worry about that. And that's why I said that one scene in the first film where she finds him embracing another woman, she doesn't get jealous. She just kind of makes a face at him and sticks out her tongue. And, you know, they're constantly joking back and forth. They're so secure in each other's relationship, in each other and their relationship, that it's refreshing then, and unbelievably and sadly, it's still refreshing now. And it's, you know, it's 90 years later. So, that's definitely, I can't stand that when it's to do they, don't they, or like I said, some little thing and they're arguing now, they're not speaking or whatever. I'm like, I've been married for almost 34 years. We're lucky. I mean, we argue, my wife and I argue, and we stay mad at each other for usually on average 5 to 10 minutes. And that's about it. We can't afford to stay angry with each other any longer than that. You know? That's, I think, and I also think that's why these movies, you know, aside from the drinking and all that stuff, maybe still hold up because people like to see a married couple that likes one another on screen. You know, it's a nice change of pace.
Yeah.
So,
and hey, you know what? I mean, I think we all collectively dodged a bullet because there was a time and a place where Johnny Depp wanted to do the Thin Man series and he wanted to star as the Nick character. Yep. That was like just a couple years ago, I think. I mean, Johnny Depp was going to be Nick from this. And I think, was it John? I think he was also thinking about being one of John D. McDonald's characters as well. And it's just like, yo, I'm good, please. No, thank you. Like, we don't, if you want to do Hunter S. Thompson, fine. But like,
Well,
maybe everything else is a little less your speed, my friend.
the problem with a franchise like The Thin Man, it's not a problem with me. Actually, it's a draw. But I don't want to throw mud at anybody, but a lot of you young people won't watch anything that's in glorious black and white.
This is true.
Very true.
I happen to love black and white. I do prefer black and white. Doesn't mean I don't watch color. Obviously, I watch a lot of color stuff, but I love black and white. And if you're not watching a movie because it's in black and white, you are really cheating yourself out of a lot of fabulous films and stories out there. And I think that if they were to remake something like the Thin Man series, which, I mean, it won't matter to me because I won't watch it, but if they were to remake it, that's one of the big reasons they do it, because they'd say, well, kids aren't going to watch these old, because obviously, no, I mean, I don't even know how many people my age know or remember who William Powell and Myrna Loy are, unless they're fans of this movie. But certainly, the numbers, the younger you go in an audience, the less chance that they have any idea of who these people are. So now it would, I could see them remaking that, and I wouldn't be bothered by it because, like I say, I'm not going to watch it, but I understand why they're doing it.
Right.
But I also, the things that made that original series so charming, I don't know how they would change it and still make it as entertaining, and they would have to do that. They'd have to change it, obviously. But
then is it even the Thin Man?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly correct, yeah. So there you go. And Ryan, get on it, man. Watch these movies.
I'm on it. Chris hasn't watched them either. Attack
He's
Kid.
the 4K guy, though. Go after him. Go after the physical media guy. Don't go after me.
So, Ryan, you're someone now who would refuse, just even if you're dying to see it, if it was on like YouTube or something, you wouldn't watch it, because even if it's uncut and good print and all that.
I've not seen enough where I'm not desperate enough to seek out the YouTube prints yet. And that's not to slander them. There's been a couple of projects where I've had to watch stuff like that because I'm working on special features for a disc. But other than that, I haven't been forced to for classics like this. I'd much rather spend $12 or $13 anyways to support Warner Archive and get a good release of it. So,
well, then by all means do it. But you got other expensive. You got kids, so.
I'm putting them up for auction soon. I need more movies.
Kids are like manhole covers, man. I mean, the money just gurgles right down. Ours are, for the most part, all out of the house now. So it's
right.
It's different, but they've left me bankrupt. So,
I was going to say, can't poo-poo things on YouTube, because that's where I watch a lot of Indian cinema, because that's the only place to get it. So
I am shocked. I am happily shocked and surprised by some of the things I will occasionally find on YouTube. Yeah. And
sometimes there is. The only place to watch it is on YouTube.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'll look at, if I can find it on Criterion, I'm going to watch Criterion, because I love all the other extras and stuff like that. I love that. But yes, if I'm desperate and I can't, then I go to YouTube and see if it's there. So, and like I say, I do have over, thousands of movies on DVD and Blu-ray. So
nice.
Well, shall we bring it home with this one?
Let's do it, Chris.
Cool. So, Otto, final question to you. Where can people find you specifically if they're looking for you specifically? Is there one thing you would point people at to engage with you directly? Is it your book?
Well, the book is the most important thing for me to push. The Barney Miller book, Barney Miller and the Files of the Old One Too, which can be found on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and Bear Manor Media. If they wanted to try to reach out to me, probably through the radio station, I have an email account there at jazz90.1.org. So they could find me there as well.
What about you, Ryan?
If you are interested in hearing me and a guest talk about all these physical media releases of these classic films, every single Thursday live on YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, Twitter, I have a show under the Disconnected where we go over all of the physical media announcements of the week. Most weeks there are at least 50, ranging all the way up to 100 plus physical media announcements. We cover every single one, discuss them all, and then we have a film discussion afterwards. We'd love to have you be in the chat. Chris, share your stuff.
Weirding Way Media, like I've already alluded to, Otto has been on several episodes of The Life and Times of Captain Barney Miller. His book has been indispensably useful in a lot of ways. I mean, I've been reading it as we've been watching the show, so I will sing the praises of your book, but I will also sing the praises of the show, which Mike and I host together. You can find almost everything I work on at weirdingwaymedia.com. Outside of one thing, which I do with Mike White and Richard Haddam, we talk about James Bond once a month. Over on Patreon, $10 and up, and you get to hear us talk about James Bond. And yeah, if that's a thing you're into, cool. If not, hey, I totally get it. We also do bonus episodes every month if that's more your speed. As for this show, like, rate, and review it wherever you get it. But if you're, well, let me rephrase this because I've been saying this differently now. Like, rate, and review the show on iTunes, please. No matter where you get it, it helps us immensely. Or if you're engaging with the video, please like, subscribe, hit that like button on YouTube. I finally get to, we have not said that before, and I get to say it finally. I feel like one of those assholes on the internet. Smash that like button, hit subscribe.
Ring that bell.
Ring the bell. I was getting to that, like, what does the bell mean? Ring the bell, too. But yeah, that's where you can find us. That's where you can find this show. And we've already told you where you can find us otherwise. So, Otto, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a lot of fun.
Thanks for the invite. I loved it. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Otto.
Yeah.
And we hope that you continue to not only check out our next episodes, but also continue to further your boundaries in the world of film.